Hello everybody, and welcome to the final part of my 9 days of Arnhem. It's been a very long and busy process of getting all these videos together, especially I have written some and recorded them within seconds of finishing the writing, so it's been really quite intense. Tonight's video will be my summarisation of why Market Garden went wrong. It's only going to be a quick one because I could talk about it for hours. However, this is my opinion. It's my opinion from learning about it for the last year and a bit. So if you don't agree with me, that's okay. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. If you are going to comment on why you don't agree with it, please be respectful, as I probably don't agree with you. We all live in a world where we need to get along. So, without further ado, with all the things you know about Market Garden throughout the week, all the players, well, most of the players, this is my summary of whose fault it was, basically. Yeah, I hope you enjoy, and I'll get cracking. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. There isn't really much I can say that puts old Monty in a good light. He fought for Market Garden to come to life, and then as soon as it was approved, he washed his hands of it and dumped it straight on old Browning's desk. Imagine a person humming an idea of a song to another person, then expecting them to know everything that they wanted from the song to sound like. That's essentially what Monty did. Frederick Browning, the man who usually takes the blame in this scenario, and in my opinion, he's probably third on the list. He's a real lesson in ignoring intelligence and missing one glorious tactical advantage. No clue? Well, during the planning stages, he missed the fact that there was a perfectly functioning ferry from Oosterbeek to the other side where the Arnhem Road Bridge is. I mean, that would have really helped if, they could have did a coup de main and got on the other end, but hey-ho. Even John Frost mentions it in his book. So, yeah, bit of a whoopsie there, Browning. His headquarters was on the Groesbeek Heights, which is where the 82nd Airborne captured. I mean, from there, he really could have pushed General Gavin to get into Nijmegen, but he didn't. The operation kind of makes he becomes a backseat driver in this, I think, because he's very rarely mentioned in media and everything of him being at Groesbeek. I didn't know until I did the research for this that he was at the Groesbeek Heights with his HQ. So he really was ineffectual being there at all. So it really should have helped the operation as well. I mean, when the RAF turned around and said, can't do more than one lift a day. That should have been his job to force that through, where they do more than one lift a day. Because the RAF, although, the transport arm of it was small, they could have done 2 lifts in a day and maybe chuck the poles in on day 2. It wouldn't have been much to ask for they had them by surprise, the Germans. There was flak all in around Arnhem, but they were dropping them 8 miles away from Arnhem. Even on the second day, you'd have had a really good chance of getting everybody in there. So it's the bit that annoys me the most about Browning, and I do tend to waffle on about how much Browning annoys me in the operation, is the fact that the mission was over and years later, whether he said it or not, I don't know, but it seems to be a quote that's attributed to him, and he says, well, he always knew from the start that it was going to be a bridge too far. And you just sit there and think, well, if you really said that, you're the general of this operation, you've literally just gone, well, I just sent all these blokes to their death and I knew they were going to die. So that's why I don't really like Browning in this operation, and I think he has to shoulder a bit of the blame, and probably why I've spent nearly 3 minutes talking about him. So now we're on to the RAF portion. And I think the RAF's part in Market Garden failing is really understated. They focus a lot on the ground elements, not getting to the bridge, people being cut off, the weather back in the England, but the RAF really could have dropped more than one lift of paratroopers in there on day one, at least on day one. But James Holland's attributed of always saying that they're bus drivers driving elite troops into battle, and for the most part, it's true. Your air elements aren't as well trained as your fighter pilots and your bombers, but they're still pilots. They're still taking the same risks as them. So it's a little bit of an unfair quote for him to say, but in Market Garden's sense, you can look at it and go, yeah, that's quite... There's a bit of truth to that. But then they're only trying to protect their own guys, and you're going to want to do that as a commander of any force. It really should have been up to Urquhart and Browning to really push them to try and get more lifts in. So I've put them third in my list of things to talk about, but really they're just doing a job like everybody else was. They really could have done a bit better, but there's other people who could have done better as well. Now, time for a bit of myth busting. This is going to be quite unpopular with a few people, but I'm going to say it because it's true. There was no aerial reconnaissance pictures taken that showed any tanks in. Yep, that's right, I said it. But it seems like it's been a little bit of explaining on behalf of the author of the book, A Bridge Too Far, by Ryan Cornelius, that he needed a way of explaining how he found out about there being tanks and stuff in Arnhem, because the Major Fuller in the film was actually called Brian Urquhart, and he was the intelligence officer for the operation, and he also was the contact for Mr. Cornelius, that he would tell him about the intelligence, but he couldn't tell the sources because it all was coming out of Bletchley Park. It was all getting encrypted and stuff, so he couldn't reveal where this information was coming from. Probably why a lot of the intelligence was ignored, I'm going to say, or iced over, but that's on Browning. Let's leave that on Browning. But yeah, they changed Brian Urquhart's name in the film. Richard Attenborough thought there would be too much confusion between Roy and Brian Urquhart, so they are no relation. So he changed it to Major Fuller. And a little bit of a disservice to O'Brien in the film that they had him escorted off by an orderly, probably saying, oh, he's had a mental breakdown, or they're hushing him or something like that. Whatever you take away from that scene, it's not true. He left at his own accord. He was really just, after Market Garden fell on its arse, he really just was not... He was disillusioned with it all because he'd given solid, good intelligence that for the most part was ignored. And he fell into a bit of a depression and was like, nah, I don't want to do it anymore, and put in a transfer. So yeah, he a big part of the operation, very under appreciated of the operation, but also, the film doesn't help his cause. But yeah, that's it. So now I'm going to talk to you about one of the regiment's objectives as part of the mission. I'm going to start with the 101st Airborne. will work from south all the way up to the north. So you might have seen it in Band of Brothers, you might have read it in the book Band of Brothers, but the 101st Airborne did pretty well out of Operation Market Garden, at least at the beginning especially. They pretty much captured all but 2 of their bridges, so they captured pretty much all the vital lines. It unfortunately fell on the Son Bridge being blown up that would cause such a backlog for 30 Corps. You really did put a spanner in the works. Out of all the bridges that could have been blown up, the Son was probably the best one the Germans could have picked, because it stopped the advance pretty much dead there. So they had to build a Bailey Bridge and get 30 Corps across. It delayed them by many hours. So when you look at it from a tactical point of view, the 101st Airborne didn't really fail per se. Maxwell Taylor did a really good job of organising their attacks, offensives, and kept the ball moving once 30 Corps were moving. So yeah, you can't say much bad about the 101st Airborne in this. So throughout the week, I've been, especially in the first video, been mentioning James Gavin. We'll get to James Gavin in a little bit, but I'm going to talk about the 82nd Airborne objectives. They only managed to capture half of their six bridges that they needed to capture. At the time anyway, 2 were destroyed, and they never really made a concerted effort until the 20th to take Nijmegen, the town, and Nijmegen, the bridge. 30 Corps were delayed, but that's no excuse. The Groesbeek Heights is one of the objectives, but that was only there to stop them really being counterattacked. But they captured that pretty quick with not much resistance in all of that area. So for me, sitting here now, 80 years later, can't really understand why he didn't make a concerted effort, General Gavin that is, to either split his forces or attack them both simultaneously. But by leaving it for 3 days nearly, the Germans fortified Nijmegen quite well with the little time that they had to do it in. So it slowed it all down. And General Gavin really just is a bit of an arse. He, after the war, possibly not liking the criticism he got, he straight away blamed 30 Corps. Said, there were 36 late getting to us. Well, that's all said and done, that they were 36 hours late to you. But you still didn't capture the bridge or the town. 30 Corps had to do that with the 82nd Airborne. And then all the Americans after the war have complained about 30 Corps, saying, they sat around and drank tea. It's because most of 30 Corps was still in Nijmegen clearing it out. So they couldn't exploit any of the gains they made because they were capturing something the 82nd Airborne should have done. And I don't know whether it's because the Groesbeek Heights were a very important part of the battlefield, but they were captured really early on, that he could have really made it fortified. But or the fact whether it's General Browning's headquarters, he just seemed obsessed with it. And I don't know whether it's his age, because he's quite a young general, but he just thought that was a great idea, to stay there for 3 days and not bother, make piecemeal attempt to get Nijmegen. So for me, really, it wasn't losing the bridge at Son, it was him buggering around and not capturing Nijmegen Bridge that the objective of the whole operation failed. You can take everything away of what you learned this evening, because he didn't capture Nijmegen Bridge. So how were they going to succeed? And I'm trying not to have a rant about why this man's an idiot, because he's not an idiot. He's an incredible general. If you look back at all the other part of the wars, he's been really good. This, for me, is the black stain on his character. So, yeah, that's General Gavin for you, and that's the 82nd Airborne. Well done. So I thought I'm trying to talk about everybody, all the regiments and stuff, and a few generals are part of it. I've got to the part where it's 30 Corps. Now, a lot of people will say a lot of bad things about 30 Corps, and you are entitled to your opinion, because you probably know a lot more than I do. However, I do think that 30 Corps were the only, probably other than the 1st Airborne Division, the only ones who had their hand tied behind their back the whole time. They were really just backseat drivers to everybody else doing their job. And they had a really hard job going all the way from Belgium through Holland and trying to do it in a couple of days down one road that you could probably get 2 tanks side by side on a good part. And the Germans pretty much, once they got up to Hell's Highway, knew that it was really easy to cut that road. And they tried on several occasions, especially after 25th of September. They really tried to cut Hell's Highway to stop more troops going through Nijmegen. But I can't really give them a lot of stick or say it was their fault or anything, because Horrocks, he had a simple plan and he just had to hope that everybody else played along to their part, really. So 30 Corps really don't get a great deal of the blame in here. This, for me personally, I can't see how they would have done anything different. Once that bridge at Son was blown up, the die were already cast, basically, that it was going to be an uphill struggle. So that's 30 Corps. So I'm going to talk about the 1st Airborne Division for this bit. I am biased. I know I'm trying to look at this impartially, but I believe that the 1st Airborne Division, despite what all the shortcomings that happened with them, with the multiple drops over multiple days, having to split their forces a lot more than he'd have liked, Urquhart, so he can hold the drop zones for the following landings. They did fantastically. I'll come to John Frost in a different bit. But the whole parachute division, the Airborne Division, did fantastically. For they honestly believed that they were going to get saved by 30 Corps and the rest of the 82nd Airborne and all the people that were coming with them. It wasn't just the 30 Corps. And they fought like lions, and they fought with stupid amounts of bravery. From the videos this week, you had Lonsdale, Lathbury, Robert Kane, Sergeant Baskerville. It's people like that who really kept the mission going. And it's not just those people, it was everybody around them. Everybody else around them fought like a lion. So their mission was essentially a pass and fail, because John Frost got to Arnhem Road Bridge, but they couldn't get there to help him. The Germans did so well in the defence. So you kind of just have to look back at the RAF again. Poor old RAF. You have to look back at them and say, this is why they needed more than one lift per day. I know it would have been a logistical nightmare, but if you thought, if they'd have dropped the Air Landing Brigade in full, because it was done over 2 days, day 3 would have been day 2 would have been a cakewalk if you'd have done 2 lifts in a day, because the Poles would have dropped in. You could have then started spreading out, clearing out Arnhem properly. It was still would have been fought for tooth and nail. It still would have been a hard slog and a hard fight, but they would have had, crucially, all the drop zones defended, and they could have moved. They could have put the front line where they wanted it, instead of the Germans dictating to them, this is where you're going to defend. They could have picked the ground to defend on, and it wouldn't have just been John Frost's 2-power on the bridge. He'd have probably had a couple more battalions there with him, at least. And what with the Poles landing in Driel, if that happened on day 2, they'd have walked across Arnhem Road Bridge unopposed, really, because the Germans would have had to have rethink the strategy. They wouldn't have sent a hell of a load of tanks over the road bridge for them to be slaughtered, so they would still have them. But I still think that the 1st Airborne Division did such a fantastic job for paratroopers versus tanks, basically. So, having mentioned in the last section, John Frost is blameless. 2-power is blameless. They did a superhuman effort to keep hold of the Arnhem Road Bridge, and I think it's a testament to John Frost that they named the road bridge after him, really, after the battle. Some years later, mind, but they just did an insanely good job. And when you read his biography, it quite touched me. I think he mentions when finally gets hold of Urquhart, and Urquhart pretty much tells him, I can't get to you, you're on your own. And it's before that section, there's a lot of positivity, and it absolutely cuts you through when you read that part of the book of him. I can't come and get you, Johnny. You just sit there and think, well, you've done so well. And you still wish that he would get relieved, even though you know the outcome. So, yeah, 2-power, John Frost, absolutely blameless. They did a fantastic job. So Roy Urquhart. Roy Urquhart is interesting because he really wasn't an airborne commander before being put in charge of the operation for the Airborne Division. But considering that, he did a bloody good job for the equipment he had, for the amount of troops that he had. He did really well. However, I do have to blame Roy Urquhart a little bit for this. I think I've wrote 3 points down for this. The first one is that he didn't really take the concerns of multiple drops seriously. I know Sosabowski was very vocal to him and Browning about how stupid it was to drop them over 3 days. Whether he felt he could question Browning on it, whether he did question Browning on it, we won't know. But he seemed like he just went, meh. The whole operation seems a bit, meh, we've got them on the ropes. We'll beat them no matter what. Doesn't matter how many Panzer Corps they've got. But it did. And my second point is that really, if he did know that this was stupid to drop them over 3 days, that he really could have pushed the RAF, or pushed Browning to push the RAF, or got Browning to go over somebody's head to pretty much make sure that they were getting 2 lifts in a day, or even 3. If you started early in the morning, you could have, by midnight, you could have dropped the last stick of paratroopers, and it would have been a bit different story. And the bit that always gets me about him, my final point about Urquhart, is that he went on his jolly. Now, I call it a jolly because he had no reason to go and scout ahead to see what there was, or be anywhere there. He's the command and control for the whole division. He's got so many sub-lieutenants who could have done it for him. But he chose to go. He then got surrounded and cut off, and he was out of the battle for a very long time. And no disrespect to Hicks, who took over, who was in charge of the air landing brigade. That's like walking into somebody and doing somebody else's test that they've done all the revising for. Hicks did okay. He did stall a little bit, but again, he didn't really do much, Hicks. And you kind of feel if Urquhart was still in command and control, it would have been a bit more decisive in the actions of pushing through and trying to get to the bridge. But it's always something that when I read it, I think, why did he do it? It cut the head off the snake for a little bit, and it kind of ruins all momentum by him being captured. Well, he wasn't captured, he was cut off, but you know what I mean. Essentially, they thought he was dead or captured. So there was a panic, and it didn't really go away, and it wasn't a panic that went forward. It was a panic that stood still, and a confusion. But to not Roy Urquhart too much, he still did a fantastic job, and quite heroic how the Paras really just held on to Oosterbeek. So yeah, that's Roy Urquhart. So in conclusion, really, with this tiny little grazing of Market Garden and why it went wrong, is that for me still it's all roads point to Gavin, because you could have Monty, who pretty much just went, oh, I've got what I wanted and now I'm going to sit in my HQ because I'm going to tell everybody that nobody else can do my job and I'll get somebody else to plan this operation. Or Browning not being very, what would be the best word other than saying he was meek? Take everything away, take every point of that away, because it all should have succeeded, and it could have succeeded if Gavin had have taken Nijmegen. John Frost probably still would have been cut off and he still would have surrendered. That's a fact, because you can't, that battalion was just absolutely decimated by the end of the battle. But they could have exploited the bridgehead that the 1st Airborne Division had got. There could have been so much different possibilities. Those tanks could have charged through Oosterbeek, pushed the Germans back and destroyed all the counterattacks that were sent up. But you don't know because they weren't there. So it's just this. It's Gavin. It's I can't sit here and say, well, I did, and I said that the Airborne would have passed if the RAF, but it doesn't matter because you had to take Nijmegen Bridge. So it was a really hard fought battle by everybody, and as much as we look back at Market Garden, is the fact that the Germans aren't really, they're talked about but not really given the credit that they deserve, because yeah, they were caught off guard. You would do, that's the point of an airborne division. But it was the hours and days after that they really, especially once they got the plans, they found the plans for Market Garden, is that they really found their footing. They made Camp Group and they sent that up against the Brits and the Americans. They knew to just keep them fighting, because they would eventually run out of ammunition, they'd eventually run out of supplies, they'd run out of men, until the SS Panzer divisions got all kicked in. And once the Panzer divisions woke up and started dealing damage, is you look at the battle then and think, well, then that's done, because you didn't have Nijmegen Bridge. But in the end of it all, whoever's fault it is or whatever, it's still war, and regardless of who started it and or its outcome, these men on both sides gave their lives so I can sit here in a comfy chair writing this video. And we all have an eternal gratitude for everybody who gave their lives so I could have this little bit of time with you today. and it's not lost on me. At the end of this video, I'm going to be putting a poppy on the screen, and I'd really like it if you would spend the 2 minutes that it's on that screen to think about all the people who lost their lives in the Second World War, or all the people in Operation Market Garden, and all the soldiers and civilians who lost their lives during it. Or thank you very much for watching.